phase 3, which is shortly to start, is announced that African Americans and other minorities are a part of this study so that we can ensure to the highest probability that the vaccine will work effectively in our populations. We've always been on the short end of so many issues in our society, and my concern is that we don't be at the short end of this one. I think Dr. Tao will talk about this. I know as recent as 3 days ago, on that registry, less than 1% of those volunteers were of minority backgrounds. This is important to understand also that the first ones who joined the registry, many of them were health professionals, physicians, nurses, and the like, because they understand that we need, again, to develop an effective vaccine. We know there's been a lot of disinformation that you hear on the internet and in various circles. So tonight really is a chance for you to participate, to ask your questions about the vaccine, to ask about COVID-19 in general, and what we can do, again, as a community to make sure that we ensure the future effectiveness of those medicines and or vaccines that are coming down the pike. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you for, again, some remarks to us, Dr. Babafende Tao. Again, we're glad you're with us, and please just share with us from your heart at this time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Smith, and I welcome everyone who's here tonight. I'm sure that I don't have to convince anyone that the battle lines have been drawn for COVID-19. And the battle lines really goes through the heart of the African American community. I say that because if you look at the number of persons infected and also the number of people who have died, unfortunately, as a result of this virus, it has disproportionately impacted the African American community. And so the question that we have is, how do we respond? Fortunately, a lot of things that Dr. Smith outlined are already in progress, and more yet to come. The one that we're talking to you about now is the vaccine research. And just to give you a little background, vaccine studies go through different stages. The first stage involves identifying the compound that we think has promise, usually done outside, in the laboratory. And once the compound has been identified, it goes through 3 critical phases of study. The first one is called phase 1 study, in which the question being asked is this vaccine safe? If a vaccine passes that first step, which usually involves a few people, typically less than 100 people, if it passes that first step, it goes through what is called a phase 2 study. The phase 2 study, the questions asked increases from just is it safe to is it safe and effective in humans? And if it passes that phase 2 step, then it goes to the phase 3 step, in which the question is, can this really work in a large number of people, and is it good enough to become the standard of care, to be able to give everyone? So the vaccines that we're talking about have been in the pipeline for some time. They've passed the phase 1 step, they've passed the phase 2 step, and they're now ready to go into the phase 3 step, which is a large study that will really lead to us getting enough information about the safety and effectiveness to be able to say that this can be used broadly. How large does this study have to be? It's been calculated that at least 30,000 individuals have to be in a phase 3 clinical trial for us to be able to know whether the vaccine is effective or not. And Northwestern is going to be participating in actually more than 3 of those vaccine trials in the next few months. The first one will start in the next few weeks, about 2 or 3 weeks from now. And we plan to enroll as many volunteers as possible. We certainly can wait until the study opens and then start looking for volunteers at that time. But we thought that it's much better to go ahead and start a registry of persons who will be potential volunteers, so that when the studies actually start, we will essentially begin to go through this Rolodex and be calling individuals who have already given us they've given us their name. We know a little bit about them. And at that point, they can decide whether they actually want to participate in that study or not. So joining the registry is not a commitment that you will participate in a vaccine study, but it is a very critical first step, because when the study starts, if that registry does not include African Americans, then we are actually setting ourselves, from the research standpoint, we are starting from behind the line. We don't want to be in that situation. So what I'm hoping that we can achieve tonight with Dr. Smith is to really answer your questions. And many of these questions are certainly, they're certainly well deserved. And when I think about it, I mentioned earlier on that the battle lines have been drawn. So imagine we're at war, we're at battle, and we have a shield that we use to protect ourselves as African Americans, as we should. And the shield really, I think, has become very heavy. In fact, it's become too heavy in some respects that uh, we have to figure out how to make that shield light enough to do what it's supposed to do, which is protect us. Why is the shield heavy? In my mind, I think that the shield has been made too heavy because there are all kinds of misinformation about vaccines. There are concerns that are legitimate, but there are also things that may not be true and that are weighing down on our ability to really know what the facts are. And I think that by removing many of those things, we can get back into the posture where we want, where the shield is heavy enough, but not too heavy for us to protect ourselves. I always say that in research, we know that there are many reasons, historical reasons why people may be reluctant to participate in research. I hope that we can, through dialogue, answer most of those questions that you have specific to this vaccine, the research that is planned, and other things around research in general. So I think I'll stop there because I'm sure that there are questions that you may have. Yes. I wouldn't necessarily call that a myth per se, because the vaccine, what it contains is a part of the virus, and I'll explain it. The virus has different components, and coronavirus, the corona in coronavirus, corona means crown in Latin. That is where the name is from. Corona means crown in Latin. And it's called coronavirus because the covering of the virus is like it has a cap, almost like a crown. And on that crown, it has little spikes jutting out of it. That is what you'll see when you look at pictures of coronavirus being shown on TV, etc. It's like it's got this cap and it's got spikes on it. Now, the tip of the spike, that is the powerful part of the virus for it to infect us. That spike is what connects to the cells, our bodies, to actually get into it. So what the vaccine contains is a portion of the spike, which is just enough for our body to actually recognize it as something that it needs to fight against. Now, I just told you that the spike is just the tip of the cap of the virus. The machine that the virus uses to make copies of itself, that it uses to cause disease, is not in the vaccine. So two things are important. Number one, there is no way somebody can contract coronavirus from getting the vaccine. It cannot happen.
Right.
Because the way you get the virus, you have to have more than a simple small tip of a cap of a spike of it. You need to have the entire machinery for it to reproduce. It's like, just if you take a human being and you have, the skin by itself touching something else, the skin cannot lead to a baby being formed. For a baby to be formed, all kinds of activities, etc., have to occur. Things happen before a baby can be formed. There is no scientific, practical way for someone to acquire infection from the vaccine. The only point is that the body becomes exposed to a portion of the vaccine, a portion of the virus that cannot infect you. And by so doing, your body produces proteins that protects you when the actual thing comes along. And that is the principle that is used in all kinds of vaccine studies. You're trying to tell the body to prepare, you're trying to prepare the body such that when it actually encounters the real thing, it will know to fight and take care of it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I hope it's important people understand that you cannot get COVID from from these vaccines. They as Dr. Tower explained, this thing called an antigen, which is a part of the crown of a coronavirus, is not alive, but it is a part of the vaccine so that your immune system can see it and say that's not normal and make antibodies against it, so that if you ever get exposed to the actual virus, your body will fight it. So you cannot get COVID from the vaccine we're talking about tonight. You cannot get COVID from the vaccine.
Right. It cannot happen. A study was done in Oxford in the UK where about 1,000 individuals participated. Some got the real vaccine, some got placebo. And placebo is just like, it was actually salt water. It was just water essentially. Some got water, some got the real vaccine. The people that got the real vaccine, they had more cases of fever, low-grade fever, body aches, but no sickness like coronavirus, like COVID-19. They did not get COVID-19. It did not disturb anyone in a significant way. And some of them had to take things like Tylenol, and that was it. And in cases, once that was recognized, what people started doing was actually to take Tylenol before the vaccine. And when they did that, no one had any significant side effects. So that is not rare with vaccines in general, but there is no, we call it treatment limiting side effect, nothing that raised concern about the potential for this to be used broadly in a large population base.
Yeah, so as we're on tonight, please go to your chat function, ask any questions. Don't be reluctant. If you have a concern, please write that in the chat box, and the moderators will give that to us, because we want to make sure that we dispel and explain to the best of our ability any concerns that you may have. Because I would love for you to not only feel free to go to the registry, but to encourage your colleagues, to encourage your friends, encourage your families to be a part. Again, I want to reemphasize, it would be a shame that a vaccine is developed, but African Americans and minorities have not been included, so that it may minimize again how effective it's going to be. I said this to one of my colleagues today who happens to be African American. I said, people who say to themselves, I'm not going to take the vaccine, I asked them, so what are you going to do? Because your body cannot be protected from COVID. Your body, none of us have ever been exposed to this virus before. So you either take the vaccine or you're going to likely get the virus. And there's a definite risk, as we've seen, with people getting this virus and having a difficult time. So I'm saying to people that I think that what we want to do tonight is dispel any of the or misinformation about vaccines, because um, vaccines, if you look at the history of them, I'm old enough to remember things like polio and diphtheria and measles. Why don't we see those things today? Because children are vaccinated. So when they do get exposed to it, they don't get these diseases. It's the same with COVID. We have never been exposed to this type of coronavirus before. Therefore, our bodies have no defense against it. We've got to develop something that's effective to make sure we're not at risk. So please, your questions, again, in the chat information. If you're on Facebook Live, same thing. Send in your questions and the moderator will funnel those questions to us.
So how would you know if you're confirmed? Well, we're going to have the registry. The registry has a number of individuals, hopefully several thousand persons. And one of the things we like to do is to make sure that we have at least 25% over the age of 65. We want to make sure that we have about 40% to be minority. And we also want to make sure we have persons who are healthy, persons who have other illnesses, etc. We're going to be calling individuals one by one and discussing the trial with them. This process is called informed consent. And the informed is what you underline because we will not do a single thing unless the participant volunteers after they've gone through extensive discussion and understands the procedures to participate. So we wouldn't know who is going to be in the study until we've had a discussion with them and they've actually consented. So the first step now is to just get our names in the registry so that when we start going through that registry, the names will be there. As Dr. Smith said earlier on, when we took a sneak peek at the registry a few days ago, we were shocked by what we found. We did not have African American representation there. And that is something that we absolutely want to avoid. We want to make sure that we have at least 40% minority in the population. In terms of the procedures involved, this is a 2-year study. Every participant is going to be, there's going to be a coin toss, essentially. And the coin toss, if it's heads, you'll go to, you get the vaccine. If it is tails, you get placebo, or basically you get water. I would not know whether the participant or the volunteer is getting the actual vaccine or whether they are getting the placebo. The volunteer themselves will not know. This process is called blinding, and it is the most rigorous way to find out whether the vaccine is effective or not. So after the injection, there are 2 injections. The first injection is followed by a second one about a month later on. And we will be calling participants every week to check on them. Now, we'll be making contact with them. We will ask the participant, how do they prefer to be contacted? I'm sure some people will say, no, call me at home. We'll have the nurse call them. Some people will say, send me a text. We'll send them a text. If you prefer email, we'll send an email. However you want us to contact you, we will do so. And then we ask participants to keep a log of what's happening to them. Are you feeling this way? Are you feeling that way? And if a participant develops symptoms that we call qualifying symptoms, those symptoms mean that if you develop any of these symptoms, including fever, cough from a number of days, anything that smells of, looks like might be some kind of viral infection, we ask them to come in for us to examine them. When they come in, we'll do some tests, we'll check their blood, we'll examine them, we'll take some samples, etc. And the whole idea is to, at the end of the day, and we'll follow everyone for 2 years. During those 2 years, the number of visits, and when I say visit, I mean the number of direct contact that the person would have with the research team is about 6 times. Initially, and then it becomes spread out. Now, if somebody is sick, as I described, we're going to see them. You can imagine that when the flu season comes around, when it's in November or December or January, Some people are going to catch all kinds of viruses. And if one of the volunteers gets that, we want to see them. The question is, do they have one of these common colds or do they actually have COVID? At the end of the day, what we're trying to see is whether the group that received the actual vaccine is protected from COVID and didn't contract COVID as frequently as the group that did not receive the vaccine. That is the way we'll be able to tell that the vaccine is actually effective. There are other things we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the blood of the volunteers to see whether they actually produce those antibodies that Dr. Smith talked about. And the antibodies, these are the proteins that we talked about that the body can produce so that when the body is exposed to the real thing, it can fight it off by itself. So we're going to be checking people's blood to see whether they have produced the antibodies or proteins to protect them against COVID, which um, which means that even if we don't even have a COVID outbreak and COVID is totally gone during this time of the study, we can still look at people's blood and say, okay, these persons who received the vaccine have produced enough antibodies for it to protect them should the real infection come around. And in fact, that's what happened in the Oxford study that I told you about. When about 1,000 individuals went into that study, they looked at the blood of the persons who got the vaccine, looked at the blood of the persons who got the placebo or water, and they were able to show very clearly that the persons who got the vaccines produced these antibodies, these proteins that should protect them against the coronavirus.
Maybe we can also on this call give those who have joined us the proper information, the website, and the phone number to call if they have a desire to join the registry. I don't see it on my screen, but can we do that to the moderators and technical people? Can we put up, for those of you who are listening right now, the phone number is 312 695 5012. That's the phone number, 312 695 5012. One more time, 312 695 5012. We'll also have for you, again, the website to go to, and that website, and they'll put on the screen in a moment, is NU Vaccine Study. That's one word, NU Vaccine Study at northwestern.edu. Again, that's NU Vaccine Study at northwestern.edu. If you do that, they'll walk you through the steps you can take to join the registry, which only says that when they open up phase 3, you will no doubt be contacted for an opportunity to participate in the study. And what's important is to get as many minorities as we can to be at least on the registry. And that, I think, is our most important goal, is to make sure that in large numbers we are included on the registry.
Uh, those with pre-existing conditions are actually a critical component of the trial. And again, the reason is that, as we know already, persons with pre-existing conditions had more severe disease overall. And if you look at the risk of death and bad outcomes, it seems to be higher amongst persons with certain pre-existing conditions. So that is a population that we have to be absolutely sure that the vaccine is effective in. If you had a vaccine that was effective in 23-year-olds, college students, but not effective in 67-year-old persons with diabetes and high blood pressure, that's not a good vaccine for public health. We need the vaccine that would work for the people at the greatest risk. That is why it's so critical for us to include persons with pre-existing conditions and also African Americans, because as I said in my introductory remarks, we clearly, if you look at the percentage of persons who have died from COVID-19 in Illinois, for example, it's really lopsided against African Americans in a significant way. So we have to make sure that the vaccine is effective in that population as well. And the same goes for persons over the age of 65. That is why, because if you look at the mortality, it's extremely weighed against persons who are over 65, and so we want to be sure that the vaccine can protect that very treasured population. And so we want at least a quarter of the participants to be over the age of 65. In fact, we will make sure that they are over the age of 65, because if we don't get them, we just won't enroll people. We will work it out such that at least 25% are over the age of 65.
That's me.
Oh, no, absolutely no. Nothing like that. No one has not even died. No one has been hospitalized as a result of the vaccine. It's the cases, what I described to you are just things that people say they have, take Tylenol, it goes away. There's no reports of that. And by the way, I talked about the Oxford study that enrolled about 1,000 people. There are now over 10,000 people worldwide that have received the vaccine. It's been given in Brazil. It's been given to a lot more people in the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe, and it's now been given in South Africa. So
Hmm.
it's not that this is not a Chicago first or US first activity at this point. It is really a global effort. But as you know, it's the epidemic now. The US is the epicenter. This is not what people predicted, and so we really have to rise to the moment and make sure that we not only conduct the vaccine studies so that we can be sure that it works in our people, but also make sure that it works in the people who are at greatest risk.
Excellent.
So this study is going on across the United States, not just in Illinois. I said there will be 30,000 individuals that are to be enrolled, and there are about 100 sites in the United States where this is going on. And we have regular meetings. One of the things that we've learned very quickly is that the underrepresentation of African Americans is a national problem. It is not a Chicago problem. And when you look on across board, right now it's about 5% of the population in registries are Black African American. So this is a boat that is something that we have to really address across borders. It's a national issue, but I think that with your support and certainly with Dr. Smith and all the pastors that have been kind enough to really allow us the access to the churches and community, we hope that we can really make Chicago a good example, as we've done in many other areas. The example that Chicago has done with the way we've at least managed the epidemic so far, it's quite remarkable. And I think we can do the same with this vaccine by being leaders and actually show what's possible in terms of enrolling African Americans in this vaccine trial. Um, I can start. That's why I started when I was talking about that shield, and that shield should never be dropped. that shield is legitimate, and it carries in it the history of Tuskegee, the history of even today with Black Lives Matter, even in our healthcare system where there are obvious disparities. That is why we need a shield, because if you imagine that it's battle, that history is why many are Black African Americans don't get the flu shot. And this is something that America would have to overcome, but it will take time. Unfortunately, COVID doesn't give us that luxury. We don't have the time. And so we have to rise to this moment in a different way, which was not pre planned. And so, as I described before, the shield that we necessarily have because of the history of Tuskegee that protects us from being hurt again is now become too heavy because of now misconceptions are now piling up onto it, and now it's become too heavy for us to lift and protect ourselves with. So I would say that we should go into this with our eyes wide open, and this is the reason why we must ask questions and try to learn as much as we can about these things. And that is why the whole process of enrolling someone in research is called informed consent. Things have changed quite a lot from the time of Tuskegee. Nobody can conduct research now without going through an extensive training in which we have to understand the importance of protecting people's rights, the importance of doing no harm, what it means to do good whenever the opportunity is, and above all, the importance of the patient's absolute right over what happens to them. So no researcher can do anything to a volunteer unless that volunteer expressly agrees to have that done to them. And so our job, the burden that every researcher has, is to make sure that that person has informed consent, that we provide as much information as we know to that person. Gone are those days that one can hide information from volunteers and then tell them after the study. We must disclose everything that we know about it. And I think that not in the near future, you will start seeing adverts on TV, hear listening jingles on the radio talking about this vaccine research. And it's not going to just target African Americans, it's going to target everyone. But there are some that will target minority populations just to encourage people that, yes, we remember Tuskegee. You must never forget. We cannot forget Tuskegee. It's part of that armor that we'll use to protect ourselves. But we have to be careful not to make it too heavy by piling on it new myths and untruths that can now make it a problem for us to defend ourselves with.
Yeah, I think Dr. Tao has answered that question. You know, it's difficult when something adverse, something negative has happened, and we know it happened. Tuskegee is one illustration, and then as he pointed out, the disparity of healthcare, of access to good care, is very real. So unfortunately, those things have happened and are happening. What we must be careful about is not to let our fears continue to keep us in jeopardy. So, as there's going to be vaccines that are going to be effective and people are going to take advantage of it, it would be a shame for us as African Americans not to have taken advantage of it. So, now what's going to happen? We continue to die, we continue to have complications because we were afraid to take part in these national studies. Dr. Tall, I gave them an illustration that all of us can relate to. I remember in the 70s when I was being trained in hematology, and I quote this Sunday in my sermon, that common leukemia among children, uh, it was an 85% death rate in 3 years. But now, that same disease, less than 5% are dying in 3 years. And the reason is chemotherapy and radiation, which again, in the African American community, we said, boy, they're experimenting on us. Well, it's not really experimentation. It means something that was so devastating as leukemia, you have to develop different kinds of medicines to eradicate it. And when we did that, we saw the death rate for those kids went way down. If we have did not participate, those kids would have died. So we got to be very careful not to allow the past to continue to be the future. We must change our future. And that means having people like Dr. Tao and others give us accurate information that can be verified. And once you see that, then you act in a different way. So I want to applaud Dr. Tao and others by coming to us and saying, what can we do? And all the major pastors of Chicago have gotten behind this. You'll be hearing more from them in the weeks coming. I had a call with them on yesterday. He said, but Dr. Smith, we need you to lead this. You're the physician. We just back you up. But they all know this, that there are people who they love and care for are under dire jeopardy with COVID. It is not a joke. It's not at the end. It is not something just to be laughed at. And it's certainly not something that we can continue to act the way we have. We've got to get a vaccine. We've got to get new medicines, and those things are down the line. One thing Dr. Tao didn't talk about is that the registry also will ask people, I believe, as they develop other modalities of treatment, would you be included in those that have not yet even been developed? Because if you look at clinical studies across the country, African Americans are usually very, very low in the percentage of those that participate. But the problem with that is it may be that those modalities will not work in us because we were not part of the development. So we've got to change. We got to change our outlook about it with trusted individuals. But like you guys on this phone call tonight, ask your questions, ask them 2 or 3 times, make sure they're properly answered, because we've got to change what has happened to us in the past to a new future for our children and for our grandkids. So you're right. We have a reason to be a little bit suspect. We got to, again, my people, let me quote a verse of the Bible. The Lord says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. But once you get knowledge, you got to then act in a different way. So I hope that will be the result of tonight's conversation. And for those that friends did not join tonight, we're going to be on again on tomorrow at 4 p.m. with the same format, trying to make sure that we get this word out. You'll hear on WVON, you'll hear on some of the other gospel stations, you'll see videos, you'll hear about this because it's really a very urgent matter that we must address and must address it right now. Brother Steve, any other questions that they have?
Well, 2 injections because the studies that have been done so far clearly showed that with 1 injection, actually, you can protect almost everybody. With the second injection, what it actually adds is that you not only protect that person from getting infected, but if that person were to get infected, it almost as if they have medicine on board to fight the infection. It's a different. It's called there's a medical term for it, but basically just means that you really could get another booster effect if you had 2 injections. And we're going to be doing it for 2 years because we know that after 2 years, there is no longer any additional benefit of keeping people on. We would by then have found out those people who developed antibodies or proteins to protect themselves would have known how many persons were infected, who got what, etc. So it is very typical that the study duration will be only 2 years. But we don't hope, we actually hope against 2 years being the time that we know the results. We are keeping our fingers crossed. The solution needs to come quickly. We are hoping that the results may come within 6 months, maybe within a year. It could be less than 6 months. It depends on how many on the results, which will be looked at on a regular basis. Certainly from the time that the thing starts, we're going to be looking closely. There are different ways that this could unfold and end up. If, let's say, after 6 months, if it becomes clear that the persons who got the placebo are getting infected with COVID at a much higher rate than persons who got the actual vaccine, the study is going to be unblinded. What that means is that all the researchers will go back and look in the record and say who got placebo, who got the vaccine, and make sure that the people who got the placebo are given the real drug. That is not rare in studies. In fact, the remdesivir study that you probably have heard about that is now being used for COVID, that is what happened. We were some of the sites that conducted that study as well. The study had a planned duration, but midway into the study, it was clear to us that the people who got the treatment with remdesivir were recovering faster, were leaving the hospital faster. So there was no longer, it's called equipoise. We already had the answer. Once you have the answer, that is the end of the study. And when the study ends, even if it is 3 months after it started, we immediately unblind, which is we go back and say who did not get the real drug. When we go back to them and say, Mr. X, Mrs. Y, thank you for participating. You did not get the real drug. Now that we know that this drug is effective and whatever else you know about the drug, it is your right to get this vaccine or this drug. Do you want to get it? The person might at that point say, I don't want it. That's still their legal right, but we will go back and give them that information. And hopefully, persons who did not get the vaccine will choose to get the vaccine. I think that is a very critical thing to take note of. It's also been asked amongst us that what if there's a shortage of vaccines? One of the things that is actually going on now is really unprecedented, because the sequence of events is that manufacturers, government, people, all of us wait until something has been proven to be effective before we start manufacturing it, which means even after we know a vaccine is effective, it might take another year before we have enough to give to people. But in this case, that is not what's happening. The production of the vaccines is already going on, such that if it's effective, it's going to be available to be used. And were there to be a shortage, discussions are going on to say that persons who volunteered to actually get the vaccine or placebo should, maybe they ought to be first in line. We don't know. We hope that eventually there will be no vaccines for everyone. But specific to your question, it's going to be is 2 years, because beyond that point, there's really no value added. And if somebody gets a placebo, we will, and we know that if the treatment is found to be effective, we will tell everybody what they got and make every effort to give the people who got the placebo the real vaccine.
Well, we're nearing our end of time. I don't want to overindulge tonight. I know there are other questions, but we will correlate all these questions and get them to myself and Dr. Tao again tomorrow at 4 p.m. You can log back on with us or your family and friends. In addition, we encourage you tonight to again call the registry if you feel comfortable about it, and at least put your name on the registry. Again, I think that the information is available to you, but in case it is not, again, the phone number to call is 312 695 5012. Again, that phone number is 312 695 5012. And again, the link is NU Vaccine Study. That's all one word, NU Vaccine Study at northwestern.edu. Again, that's NU Vaccine Study at northwestern.edu. And you can sign up for the registry. My wife and I have already agreed, without discussing it with our kids, we're going on the registry. Uh, we're not afraid. We are informed, and we want to make sure that we push this so that African Americans and other minorities who have been left out in so many ways are not left out this time. We think that's critical as leaders. And I've encouraged all my colleagues, all my friends, if you have questions, join the Zoom calls, call the number, ask your question. Don't be afraid. But once you have the right information, again, if you feel positive, then to move forward. So again, I want to thank again my good friend for joining us tonight from Northwestern, Dr. Tao. He'll be back on tomorrow at 4 o'clock. And you'll hear he'll be on the national news, I'm sure, and the local news and YouTube and everything, because, as he said, we want to make sure that those persons who are most vulnerable to COVID are allowed to get the proper information and questions answered. So again, to all of you, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we look forward to tomorrow. Or if you can tell me tomorrow on when you connect in, I've already signed up, Bishop. I've already put my name on the registry because we really want that to happen. I have no reluctance about it. We've got to make sure that people are protected and that they are included. So again, Dr. Tao, you may want to have some closing remarks.
I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to continued engagement so that we can really solve this problem together.
We'll be doing that again. And to all of you on Facebook Live, I can't see you. I saw the ones on the Zoom call. I couldn't see the hundreds on Facebook Live. But again, we'll be back on tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank all of you, to our technical staff at AFC. Thank you. And for the moderators and to all of you, God bless you. Love you in Jesus' name.
Thank you.